They did not kill him quickly. They cut him open and pulled out his insides, while he was still alive. Piece by piece, they tore him apart as a crowd in London watched, transfixed by horror. This is the gruesome end of Sir William Wallace, a Scottish hero whose name struck fear into one king and inspired courage in countless common folk. Wallace was no ordinary rebel. He had risen from obscurity to challenge the might of England's King Edward I. For a time, he was guardian of Scotland and a symbol of defiance. But in the summer of 1305, the mighty freedom fighter was shackled in his enemy's grasp. His execution would be a public nightmare, a brutal message for all to see. And as the blades and ropes awaited him, everyone knew that the coming punishment would be one of the cruelest ever recorded in history. How did it come to this? To understand, we must journey back to a Scotland under the iron heel of King Edward. In the late 13th century, Scotland's independence hung by a thread. King Edward I of England, ruthless and ambitious, had exploited a succession crisis in Scotland to claim overlordship. English soldiers garrisoned Scottish towns, and taxes drained the land. Resentment simmered. William Wallace was a young knight from a minor noble family. Legend says English occupiers killed someone he loved, sparking his rage. Whatever the cause, by 1297, Wallace could no longer remain idle under English tyranny. He rallied countrymen to fight back. Wallace's rebellion ignited like a wildfire. He led a ragtag Scottish force to a stunning victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, ambushing and annihilating a much larger English army. Overnight, Wallace became the guardian of a newly liberated Scotland and the most wanted man in King Edward's empire. But Wallace's triumph only enraged Edward. The very next year, the English king personally marched north with a massive force. The two armies clashed at Falkirk in 1298. Arrows darkened the sky, and heavy cavalry shattered the Scottish lines. Wallace fought bravely, but the English prevailed. Scotland's rebellion was beaten into the mud, and Wallace barely escaped with his life. Defeated, but not broken, Wallace refused to surrender. He resigned his official title to evade political infighting and continued the struggle from the shadows. For years, he became a phantom, rumored to slip in and out of Scotland, seeking aid from France or rallying small bands of resistance. King Edward's armies might control the castles and cities, but as long as Wallace roamed free, the spark of rebellion still glowed. Edward never forgot the humiliation Wallace had dealt him. Other Scottish nobles were forgiven after Falkirk. Some even bent the knee to Edward, but not Wallace. Edward, though I wanted him crushed at all costs. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would lead to an almost unimaginable horror. The hammer fell in August 1305. After years in hiding, Wallace was betrayed by a fellow Scotsman. Sir John Menteith, a Scottish knight loyal to England, seized Wallace near Glasgow and handed him to English soldiers under cover of night. Shackled in irons, the legendary rebel was dragged southbound in a horse-drawn cart, doomed and defiant. Nearly 400 miles he traveled, from the green hills of his homeland to the grey heart of England. At every village and town, word spread. The infamous William Wallace had been caught. By the time he reached London, the city was abuzz. Crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of this wild Scotsman, whom they knew only from fearful whispers and propaganda. Many expected a monster. Instead, they saw a gaunt, battle-scarred man, firmly chained, but unbowed in spirit. On August 23, 1305, Wallace was hauled before the English authorities in Westminster Hall. The great chamber was packed with lords, officials, and curious onlookers. He was forced to stand on a platform, staring down his accusers. They charged him with treason against King Edward and with atrocities committed during the war. Wallace, however, had never sworn loyalty to Edward. In his eyes, he owed the English king nothing but contempt. When the accusation of treason was read, Wallace's voice rang out in firm denial. He could not be a traitor, he said, for he had never been Edward's subject. It was a bold truth, but it did not matter. This was no true trial. No jury was convened, no defense allowed. The verdict had been decided long before he entered the hall. Edward's judges pronounced the sentence every rebel feared: death by hanging, drawing, and quartering. The words alone made even hardened men shudder. It meant Wallace was to endure a sequence of agonies, a death reserved for the worst of traitors. He would be hanged until barely alive, then cut down and mutilated in unspeakable ways. Finally, his body would be hacked into pieces, and it would all be done that very day. As Wallace was led out, the purpose was clear. His death was to be a spectacle of royal vengeance. The worst, however, was yet to come. Guards clapped Wallace in irons and marched him from Westminster to the execution ground at Smithfield. The streets of London swarmed with people eager to witness the fate of the king's greatest enemy. Some in the mob hurled rotten food and stones. Others fell silent at the sight of the man who had defied a king. Stripped of his garments, William Wallace was tied behind a horse and dragged through the filth of the cobbled streets. His skin scraped raw against the stones, leaving a trail of blood. The summer air filled with the crowd's jeers and cheers, but Wallace's expression, as best we know, remained resolute. He had lived as a symbol of resistance. Now, even in agony, he would not give them the satisfaction of begging for mercy. At Smithfield, the execution site awaited, a gallows and a gruesome array of tools. Wallace was half dead from the dragging, but the executioners were just beginning. They hauled his bruised body up onto the scaffold and put a noose around his neck. In an instant, the trapdoor opened and Wallace dropped. The rope yanked tight, strangling him. He kicked and swung, his face turning a dark shade as the life was nearly choked out of him. The watching crowd roared in anticipation. This was the fate they had been told the traitor deserved. But death was not allowed to come. Not yet. After a few moments, the executioner cut the rope. Wallace's body crumpled to the wooden platform. He was gasping and semi-conscious, eyes bulging, still alive. His fate, however, was far worse than a simple hanging. His ordeal had only begun. Before Wallace could even regain his breath, the executioner and his assistants pinned him down. What followed plunged even the rowdy spectators into stunned silence. The executioner took up a small blade. With deliberate precision and chilling calm, he emasculated William Wallace. In one horrifying stroke, he sliced off Wallace's genitals. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Wallace's body writhed in unbearable pain, but the executioner showed the severed, privy parts to the onlookers, as if presenting a trophy. Then, in an added act of cruelty, he tossed the severed flesh into a nearby fire, burning it before Wallace's very eyes. The message was clear. Not only was this man to be killed, he was to be utterly humiliated and destroyed, body and legacy. And still, they were not finished with him. With grim determination, the executioner now took a larger knife and slit open Wallace's abdomen from chest to gut. A fresh wave of blood spilled over the scaffold. The smell of iron and bile filled the air. Reaching into the open cavity, the executioner began pulling out Wallace's intestines, long, glistening coils of gut, and yanking them out for all to see. People in the front of the crowd reeled back as the executioner heaped the steaming entrails on the scaffold. Some witnesses retched at the sheer atrocity of the sight. Wallace, astonishingly, was still alive, at least at the start of this ghastly procedure. It is said the executioner made sure the rebel leader was conscious enough to see his own entrails being piled up. One by one, Those vital organs were torn from his body. Stomach, bowels, and according to some accounts, even his heart was finally cut out and held aloft. As each piece was removed, the executioner cast it into the fire, the flames crackling and spitting as they consumed the organs of the dying man. By now, a heavy silence had fallen over the crowd. What had begun with boisterous shouts now ended in horror. Many could not watch any longer. Even the most vengeance-hungry spectators turned their faces away, unable to stomach the terrible scene. William Wallace mercifully likely lost consciousness well before the end. Within minutes, the life was drained from him, his courageous heart literally and figuratively destroyed by England's savage justice. Finally, to ensure nothing of the great rebel remained intact, the executioner took up a heavy axe. With methodical fury, he decapitated William Wallace, severing his head from his mutilated body. He held the head high by its hair, showing the lifeless face to the crowd. But even that was not the final act. Wallace's corpse was now just a bloody husk, but King Edward's orders were explicit. The body of this traitor was to be quartered. The executioner positioned his blade and chopped through flesh and bone to divide what was left of Wallace into 4 parts. Limbs were hacked off with cracks and splinters as bone met steel. In the end, 4 chunks of human remains lay on the gore-soaked scaffold beside the fire's embers. Thus ended the life of William Wallace, in pieces, brutalized beyond imagination. The grisly work done, the executioner and officials stood amid the carnage, satisfied that no traitor could ever have suffered more. The spectators dispersed in a daze. Many would be haunted by what they had witnessed, but the story of William Wallace did not end with his death. Even in death, Wallace's torment served a purpose for his enemies. King Edward wanted his old foe to serve as a warning. The authorities took Wallace's severed head and dipped it in tar, preserving it against decay. Not long after, that head was mounted on a pike at the top of London Bridge. There, Wallace's pale, tar-soaked face gazed out over the city he had never truly seen in life. Now, a horrific guardian of the bridge, meant to terrify all who passed beneath. It was the first thing visitors to London would see, the head of the Scottish rebel who dared defy Longshanks. The 4 quarters of Wallace's body were likewise put to use as grim proclamations. Each of his limbs was sent to a different town with orders to display them publicly. An arm of Wallace was sent to Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast of England, another to the town of Berwick on the Scottish border. A leg went to Perth in Scotland, and the final limb to Stirling, near the very battlefield where Wallace had won his greatest victory. In each locale, the message was the same. This is what becomes of rebels. Farmers, merchants, and nobles alike recoiled at the sight of the decaying flesh on the city gates. But the point was made. Fear crept into the hearts of many who might have thought to rise up. Edward I had turned Wallace's body into a macabre deterrent, hoping to snuff out the last embers of Scottish resistance. At first, it may have worked. There was shock and dread in Scotland at the news of Wallace's fate. Some former allies of Wallace, seeing his terrible end, must have felt any dream of freedom was now hopeless. Who would dare share Wallace's fate? In London and across England, Edward's supporters likely felt a grim satisfaction. The king's justice had been brutally served. Yet, in the cold nights that followed, something else began to stir. Wallace had become more than a man. In death, he was a martyr. Tales of his valor and suffering spread through Scotland like wildfire. The cruelty of his execution only deepened the hatred many Scots held for their oppressors. Rather than extinguishing the idea of Scottish independence, Edward had inadvertently fanned its flames. Within less than a year, Scotland rose again. Inspired by Wallace's sacrifice, Robert the Bruce and others took up the banner of rebellion. The struggle continued with renewed fury. Bruce would eventually win a decisive victory against the English at Bannockburn in 1314, securing freedom for Scotland for a time. Wallace's barbaric execution, meant to cow the Scots into submission, instead fueled their resolve. In the long run, the image of the fearless warrior who endured unspeakable agony rather than bow to a conqueror became a rallying cry. Edward I, the very king who ordered Wallace's body torn apart, died in 1307, never having seen Scotland fully subdued. Wallace's dream outlived the man who tried to destroy it. His death had backfired on the English crown, turning a rebel leader into a legend that would echo through the ages. The fate of William Wallace is a stark example of both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human courage. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, power, and sacrifice. Wallace had committed himself to a cause he believed was just, the freedom of his people. And for that, he endured a punishment designed to break the body and spirit in every possible way. History remembers him not just for how he lived, but for how he died. In that final moment of agony, a martyr was born. The brutality inflicted upon him revealed the true nature of his oppressors and gave immortal weight to his cause. We are left to wonder, what would we risk for freedom? Wallace knew every step of the way what capture would mean. He had seen the fates of other rebels, yet he chose to fight on when others yielded. Would you have had the courage to stand as he did, staring down death without a flicker of doubt? It's a question easier asked than answered. Wallace's ghastly execution also reminds us how far those in power will go to maintain control. In their effort to make Wallace an example, the English showed the world the extreme cruelty a government can inflict on a human body. They hoped terror would keep people obedient. But Wallace's story shows that terror can sometimes inspire the very resistance it seeks to crush. His courage under torture lit a fire in the hearts of his countrymen. The image of a man who wouldn't bow, even as he was cut to pieces, proved more powerful than any sword or decree. In the end, William Wallace's life and death became a symbol that tyranny can be challenged, that a common man can shake the foundations of an empire, and that the human spirit can endure far more than flesh alone can bear. His execution was meant to erase him from history, but instead, it ensured his name would never be forgotten. The story of Wallace stands as a testament to the indomitable desire for freedom and the tragic price that sometimes must be paid for it. Thank you for watching till the end of this dark and harrowing tale. The execution of William Wallace is among the most brutal events recorded in history, and it truly makes us reflect on the value of freedom and the cost of courage. How does this story make you feel? Let's continue the conversation. Share your thoughts or feelings in the comments. Would you consider Wallace a hero, a madman, or something else? And could you have endured what he did for your beliefs? If you found this story informative and compelling, please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into history's darkest moments. We have many more true stories that uncover the chilling side of the past. Thank you for watching, and remember, those who do not learn from these dark chapters of history may be doomed to repeat them. Stay curious, stay cautious, and until next time, farewell.